Hi everyone, and thanks for being with me. This is day 4 of my commitment to discuss, to talk about, to see whether we can get some movement around activism that will help us to deal with and manage the scourge which is family violence in this country. And I've put together a number of sessions to this point which talk about some skills that we could have that are going to benefit us in this particular battle. And, uh, and today, though, I'm going to talk about something else. I'm going to talk about what it means and the impact, in particular, that domestic violence has on our community. So I'm going to have a look today at just an article written by Kate Fitzgibbon to start with, and then we'll have a look at um, some statistics around domestic violence. And the article that I'm referring to from Fitzgibbon is really important because it highlights or focus on the point, I guess, that number one, that domestic violence is a scourge on our society, that women lose their lives as a result of the behaviour of their partners or ex-partners, and that there needs to be something done in order to prevent women from having relationships, perhaps in the first instance, whereby they can be harmed or damaged, and secondly, to work with men so that men can discover ways to manage their behaviour differently and so that they don't commit the violence that they do. And what I'm going to talk about today primarily is about how important, and it's really hard to get this message across, I guess, but how important it is to find ways to uh, prevent women and children from being harmed by domestic violence. And I'm going to go to this article first from Fitzgibbon, and the title of it is "It feels like we are moving backwards on violence against women. Are we becoming desensitised?" And I think that in itself raises a really important question for all of us: is do we dismiss it? Are there myths or things that we think about domestic violence that are unhelpful? Do we have, I've spoken about this before, do we have people, men, who have conversations with us about the way they think and feel about women that we don't address with them? We don't say to them, well, that's unfair, it's untrue, it's damaging, what's that like for her when you think that way or behave in a certain way towards her? And there are many of us, I guess, who have friends who indicate to us that their attitude towards women are damaging, and we choose to not participate in that because we either believe it's none of our business or it's perhaps not as bad as what we think it is, but we don't address the underlying damaging ideas that men might have that may manifest themselves in behaviours which would impact women and children. So we step aside and we ignore it. And I think that this is part of the desensitisation process, is that firstly it happens a lot. Secondly, we believe that it doesn't happen to us. We're not involved in this. We're not a party to it. Our behaviour is okay, so we think, and that if it's happening to a mate, then I should not get involved in that. I should not have a conversation with their partner about his behaviour because that would interfere with my relationship with him, and so on. So there's lots of reasons, and I'll go into some of these myths that we hold later on when I look at the stats. But Fitzgibbon herself does raise some interesting points. And she says here, the intensity of fatal attacks on women has reached crisis levels over the last decade. We must remember that they are preventable. And this is the point. It is preventable. But the point is we have to all be responsible at some level for the way we engage with people around potential violence. And us men often sit back and do nothing and say nothing because we just don't want to get involved. When in actual fact, sometimes our involvement may very well save somebody's life. For more than a decade, I've studied the killing of women by men's violence. From my own work and a global body of research from which I draw, I know that this violence is inherently preventable, and within that knowledge lies hope. The hope that improved responses, more effective early interventions, and true commitment to prevention, all spearheaded by sustained national leadership, would drive down the rates of women killed by men known to them. And as I've said before, I've worked a lot with men around this particular issue. I can't say personally how many of those men have made a significant difference, because once you work with them, you don't often get feedback on the response, but occasionally I have, and that feedback has been quite positive. You don't know overall what sort of way. I'm going to talk actually in one of my other future sessions about a particular process I use that helps to address the issues directly with men about their relationships with their partners, and particularly get them to empathise around their partner's experiences of them. So stand by for that one. It'll be an interesting session, I can assure you. In 2024, more than 12 years after I completed my PhD examining the sentencing of men who killed their female intimate partners in Australia, I have been reminded all too often of the pertinence of a quote attributed to the author Margaret Atwood. It quotes, "Men are afraid that women will laugh at them. Women are afraid that men will kill them." While the quote is about 40 years old, it remains starkly relevant. The horrific events of 2024 in Australia demonstrate that women continue to have good reason to fear men's violence. It's a truism to say that women's lives matter, but then why is it that the intensity of fatal attacks on women has reached a level not seen for over a decade in Australia? So why is it being amplified right now? And some of that reason is the way that we're raising our sons and the conversations that we're failing to have with our sons, and they're influenced by people such as Andrew Tate and others who have misogynistic views. And I think also to some extent there's some research that demonstrates that pornography also has an impact in this particular area as well. According to Counting Dead Women Australia, a voluntary initiative led by researchers from the online group Destroy the Joint, at least 39 women were killed by men's violence in the first 6 months of 2024. That figure's now up to over 60. In recent years, on average, at least one woman has been killed each week by men's violence in Australia. In 2022, this equated to the deaths of 57 women nationally. In 2023, at least 64 were killed, and this year it potentially will be more. So I will now, though, turn to some of the statistics in relation to this, and this is from the Bureau of Statistics, and some of this stuff is really worth identifying. I'll just come to the top of this. Australian Institute of Health is the site that I'm referring to here, and I'll just need to extend this page a little bit so that we can see it. There we go. So, family violence and sexual violence is a major health and welfare issue in Australia, occurring across all socio-economic and demographic groups, but predominantly affecting women and children. These types of violence can have a serious impact on individual families and communities, and can inflict physical injury, psychological trauma and emotional suffering. These effects can be long-lasting and can affect future generations, and nothing is more truer than that, I can assure you. Both family violence and domestic violence include a range of behaviours types such as, and most of us would know and understand all of these, I think, physical violence, for example, hitting, choking or burning; sexual violence, for example, rape, penetration by objects, unwanted touching; emotional abuse is known as psychological abuse, for example, intimidating, humiliating. Now, I just wanted to raise this issue around coercive control, because this tends to be a new term that seems to have found its way into the vernacular, and it's an important one to be aware of, I think, because it has its sense of reality. Coercive control is often a significant part of a person's experience of family and domestic violence. It is commonly used to describe a pattern of controlling behaviour used by a perpetrator to establish and maintain control over another person. Sexual violence can take many forms, including sexual assault, sexual threat, sexual harassment, child sexual abuse, and image-based abuse. However, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, ABS Personal Safety Survey, uses a narrow definition of sexual violence, including only sexual assault and sexual threat, with sexual harassment and experiences of abuse in childhood reported separately. And they are just far too common. So how common is family, domestic and sexual violence? And these statistics, I think, are really worth noting. So, and it does include men in this. So this is important for us to understand that assault primarily and the death of a partner primarily occurs by men against women. But this is looking at a range of physical and sexual violence, for example, in this particular survey. So it discovered that 1 in 6 women and 1 in 18 men experience physical or sexual violence. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men here experience emotional abuse by a current or previous cohabitating partner since the age of 15. So I find it interesting that particularly in men, the emotional abuse seems to be far more dominant than the physical and sexual violence in men, as we can see by these figures over here. So 1 in 6 women and 1 in 13 men is economic abuse, financial abuse, and sexual violence 1 in 5 to 1 in 16 for men. So whichever way we look at this, it is evident that the primary perpetrators of violence are men to women. But it is important to note that there are reports certainly of emotional abuse in a larger proportion of the cohort, which refers to men being abused by women. So these stats are worth noting because the important thing to me is it doesn't exclude men from this experience. And one of the arguments we get is that men experience violence, especially assault as well by women, and that is true. The point that I'm making, though, is that primarily it's men who are killing women, which is what a lot of what I'm talking about is really about. So 11.3, 2.2 million had experienced violence from a partner, 5.9%, 1.1 million had experienced violence from a boyfriend, girlfriend or date, and 7%, 1.4 million had experienced violence from another family member. And I wanted to come down to these statistics. So this is important. These are the attitudes that people have around domestic violence. So most of these have to be debunked because they are the reasons why women in particular remain within some of these relationships. Because, and this is where I think it's important to understand what role we play. We should not buy into some of these myths, and we should understand the experiences of women who are trapped in these situations to better understand why it is that they don't leave and why it is to some extent they take extraordinary measures to find ways to leave. And so some of these, so 25% believed that women who do not leave their abusive partners are partly responsible for violence continuing. That's absolute crap. There's no reason why anybody should be violent towards another person of any description, any form of abuse. That's about 25%, quarter of the population, believe that women somehow contribute. That is crap. Now, I've had lots of men throughout my professional life who have talked to me about blaming the partner. And one of those examples, the most common one is, we're having an argument, she follows me around and she wants to know what I think about this and what I think about that, and I just want to walk away from her, and she wants the answer, as to why I'm doing what I'm doing and stuff, and she just follows me around And I get to the point where I just have to push her away, and I've heard that 1,000 times. The answer to that often is, well, maybe there's some stuff that she would like to resolve and you're failing to talk to her about it. Maybe if you just sat back and had a discussion around it, you might be able to resolve those issues for her, but you don't. And the question is, why don't you? But don't blame her for the fact that she wanted a response from you about something that was concerning her and you pushed her or hit her or yelled at her or called her a name or put her down in some way. Those behaviours, under all circumstances, are unacceptable. 34% agreed it was common for sexual assault accusations to be used as a way of getting back at men. That sounds like the men's rights movement to me, and that is so wrong. 23% believe domestic violence is a normal reaction to day-to-day stress. How could anybody possibly ever believe that? 19% agreed that sometimes a woman can make a man so angry he hits her without meaning to. That is crap. And again, crap. 15% agreed that there is no harm in sexist jokes. Of course there is. It's offensive. It puts women down. It is wrong. There's no other way to describe it. 41% agreed that many women misinterpret innocent remarks as sexist, so they say. So the point is that these beliefs that people have make excuses for the male's violence. And the more that you make excuses for a male's violence, the more he is more likely to feel validated or have his violence validated. And that as time goes by, I know from working with men, that escalates. So what can start up as a small argument or a disagreement can wind up being a full throttle fight where he lashes out at her and in some cases lashes out to the point whereby he kills her. All of these things that I've just highlighted are wrong. But these are the beliefs that keep women in relationships and prevent us, the community, from responding to what is happening in some of these relationships. So if you've got any thoughts about any of this, do you participate in some of these false beliefs? Do you find yourself noticing things but not saying anything to the male or the woman involved? Do you side with one party over another? Do you not listen to them as to what's happening for them? What are you doing that contributes to this problem? And what can you do to stop it? Subscribe to my channel, ring the bell for further information, and let me know what you think. In the meantime, more importantly, take care of yourself, look after yourself, look after those people that you love, and be safe.